So let's congratulate our big wet president um, on successfully tanking yet another right wing party in the Anglosphere cinematic universe. This time in Australia, in the whatever it is, every 4 years racism Olympics that constitutes their federal elections. So good on you, Mr. Trump. Very strong.
They said that you couldn't make a sitting opposition leader lose his seat in a wave election twice in a row. And yet he's done it, folks. He's done it. In two different elections, the right wing challenger to a sitting center left government has gone down in their own seat thanks to the guy in the White House.
Donald Trump is single-handedly reversing the right-wing authoritarian trend across the globe.
That's right.
This is another election where it looked like the out of power Conservative Party had a significant polling lead right up until Trump took office, and then suddenly things reversed and Team Liberal pulled out ahead.
It wasn't as dramatic as Canada, where they came back from like a 25-point spread, but it was still pretty sizable. I think it was 10 or 12 points.
And also, the new government is the largest majority that they've had in, I think, at least 30 years. And it's the biggest win for an incumbent, I think, in Australian political history. So it wasn't just, he squeaked through, which you could sort of make the case for about the Liberals in Canada, depending how you want to dice and chop the popular vote. Not the case in Australia. It was a decisive victory.
It's probably not the best sign for America that we have parties winning on the back of what is essentially anti-Americanism all over the world right now. I mean, it's anti-Americanism processed through the filter of Donald Trump, so I'm pretty sympathetic to that. But at the same time, like, there are kind of co-aligned sentiments that we may have to sort of deal with and unpack a few years down the road if everything goes well.
I just want to know that once again, America is saving the world. It is much to our detriment, but nevertheless, we are serving as a warning for everyone else. The only country that is not getting the message, seemingly, is Britain, and that's to be expected because it's full of Brits. But we're batting pretty solidly here.
So I'm on vacation right now in Greece, and I have gotten 3 takes on other countries from Greek people. First off, they love Americans. They love that we funded an archaeological institute in the 1950s. They love that we're Americans. They're into it. They really are ambivalent about the Turks. At least in the conversation I've had today, Turks being here, not a big deal. We had to fight them for our independence, but no harm done. The British, my lord, these people hate the British. I didn't know this kind of hatred of the British was possible. And they are about to 1776, these guys, if they can dredge up some help from the French somehow, like we did.
Is this because of the marbles thing?
It's entirely because of the marbles thing.
Okay.
Can you explain the marbles thing?
So there was this Scottish guy. He's actually not English, which is rare that a British person creates this kind of problem for the UK. From Scotland as opposed to England. But there was this Scottish guy who was an ambassador to Greece. He bribed the Ottomans to let him essentially cut as much marble as he could organize people to carry out of the Parthenon and related buildings. And that's all now in the British Museum. He was the Count Elgin or Lord Elgin. I can't remember. Who cares? We had a revolution, so we didn't have to care about that sort of thing. Anyhow, he is despised. I did not know how deep the hatred went, and I thought the Greeks hated the Turks, and nope, it's the British.
Yeah. Now we don't give the Scots enough shit, to be clear. When you think about like Ulster, Northern Ireland, that's all the bad guys. They're all the Scottish people. They're the ones who colonized the place. So it's high time that we pay some attention to the Scots here and stop putting it all in the English.
We're just on a global tour to offend everyone in Western Europe, I think.
Let's do it. Who are we missing? The Germans, the swamp Germans,
the bog Germans.
I thought that the Brits were sitting pretty in Greece for a while because of Lord Byron, actually, Lord Byron, the poet, who moved to Greece, spent his entire family fortune for the cause of Greek independence, and wound up sort of a national hero of a nation that wasn't his. But I guess that particular bump has now faded. Lord Byron was not famously a normal man. He was kind of a superhero of the time.
How do you translate mad, bad, and dangerous to know into Greek?
Can't help you there. I'm stuck on the Romance languages. Thankfully, everyone here speaks English, which is great. Very easy for one of us.
Something acidophilus, probably.
So Lord Byron wasn't a normal man, but this week we figured it's been long enough that we've been doing a podcast called Normal Men that we sort of at least attempt to explain what a normal man is. And we're going to endeavor to do that tonight or today, depending on when you're recording this podcast.
I also think that there has been more attention on this in kind of major big publications. So there were a couple of different pieces published this week. There was a Ross Douthat interview in the New York Times with a guy named Keeperman, and we'll get into that here in a second. But then there was also a Wall Street Journal essay from a high schooler that I thought was pretty interesting, in which he was trying to explain why some of his peers are really into like the Tate brothers. So like Andrew Tate is right-wing, reactionary, just monstrous personality, who has some capture, I guess, with younger men. And I think, I don't know, on social media, a lot of people kind of went hard after the author of this piece, who again is a high school student, and who I think was just trying to sort of project what it is that he thinks some of his peers think, why they're interested in it, in Andrew Tate and all of that. But it was also worth mentioning that that kid goes to an all-male Catholic high school, and that is going to be sort of a group that generates some interesting thoughts and perspectives about manhood and kind of masculinity and all of that, just in general.
Yeah, I think that one of the big issues that we have in defining masculinity today is the changing definition and perception of femininity. What it means to be a woman has obviously changed a lot over the lifetimes of everybody on this podcast. We've gone in roughly our lifetimes from I think it was a steady state of about 60% out of home labor force participation for women to almost co-equal labor force participation between women and men in this country. And we've gone from a situation where control over reproduction was really limited. You don't have to, you only have to go back 2 generations to get back before hormonal birth control and back before Roe v. Wade. So, there are a lot of things that have changed on the distaff side of things. And in some ways, the American vision of masculinity has not fully compensated for that set of changes, because it no longer makes sense, to me at least, to define masculinity as in opposition to femininity. What it is to be a man is not in opposition to what it means to be a woman anymore, because we're doing the same things. We're competing in the same things. There's no longer as much of a gender difference either in the workplace or at home as there was for our grandparents' generation.
Yeah, and that's true in the weight room too. I mean, I saw a video on Instagram this week of I think she's a power lifter or an Olympic weightlifter who was repping. It was roughly 400 pounds for 10 reps and doing it. I pride myself on throwing my big boy pants, big boy shorts on when I get on the squat rack, and my max is only a little bit more than that. I mean, I'm 6'3", 240 pounds, and for me, a good day on the squat rack is north of 400, and this woman's up here crushing 10 reps. And I think that, it seems like a silly thing to put in the context of grand social changes like the labor force participation rate and the role of men and women. But it really is true that women are doing everything that men are doing today. That's especially true if you just take a sampling of society as opposed to the absolute superlatives of either gender.
And I think that's really how I would characterize being a normal man, is simply embracing the more egalitarian world we live in, and not just compartmentalizing everyone.
I think a thing that is interesting, and Proctor mentioned this before, but these are things that are not kind of in conflict with one another. Masculinity and femininity. These are things that coexist together, and I think that culturally there's a weird reactionary tendency on the right to try to make things mutually exclusive and make these things all one way or all the other. So in that Douthat interview, one of the things that he and Keeperman talked a little bit about is how kind of the new masculinity on the right is sort of gleefully offensive, and kind of trolling and kind of uber macho and uber male, and things like that. And I think that is true in terms of what the right wing is going for. I just think it's really at odds with what most people experience in like their regular daily lives.
And who is this guy Keeperman, for those of us who are not terminally online or simply refuse to read Roth Douthat on principle like me?
So Keeperman is a fairly unreconstructed white nationalist. He's one of the real bad guys out there, for my money. I was disappointed that he was getting interviewed in the Times full stop, because this is not just a tee hee, I have some dangerous things to say about race kind of guy. This is a guy who is straight up exclusionary Nazi. And I don't think he really makes any bones about that. He's talked extensively on Twitter about white pride, about how people should be proud of their, not just of their heritage, but of their very racist opinions.
One of the things that I found really just gross and irritating about the profile is that, like Proctor says, like, this guy is an unreconstructed white nationalist. So like this guy doesn't have any business getting interviewed in the Times anyway. But on top of that, Douthat is a terrible interviewer. Like the interview itself is a lot of Douthat essentially going on at length about his own views, which some of which Keeperman shares and some of which he doesn't, and then asking Keeperman to co-sign them. So it's not only did you bring a white nationalist Nazi onto your New York Times podcast, you did so in a way that is not even interesting and is just a bad use of the form.
Yeah, and I mean the context of this interview was talking about conservative art and what particularly film art might be conservative versus the assumption that most film is liberal, in terms of political slant, which I think it's broadly true that at least most American film is politically inclined is politically inclined to the left. But it kind of seemed like Keeperman's big takeaway is that anything he likes is conservative, and that's not a rigorous way of doing critical analysis of text. That's, you can get away with that maybe your junior year in high school, but that's not even going to get you through an undergraduate syllabus.
I also appreciate that Keeperman and Douthat are once again living up to what we have all observed, which is that these white nationalist type guys who believe in the master race or something are always just cartoonishly not master race looking type people.
So the thing is that like Keeperman is, as far as I can tell, is not really any more interesting than anybody else across the entire kind of right wing podcasting and influence space. But all these guys have this really warped, kind of bizarre view of masculinity, that is about peacocking for other men. It's not even about like trying to be presentable or attractive or to other women. It is exclusively about trying to project manliness to attract other men, which I think is kind of fascinating in the way that it plays out.
In some ways, I think that's the central problem with kind of the manosphere take on how you should interact with women, is that the manosphere view has a lot of trouble getting past the idea that your woman, your wife, your girlfriend, whoever your partner is, such as they're your partner, exists for you to show off to other men. That the entire value of a woman to you is as a trophy for display. It's not really about your personal relationship with her, except insofar as that relationship itself can be instrumentalized as a trophy. You know, look how well my wife listens to me or obeys me or whatever. And that's kind of the core of the Andrew Tate appeal is that he's making the argument that there are women who will do anything for you if you just treat them the way I say.
Which is both an excellent demonstration of how extreme the misogyny of these guys is. That even your most treasured relationship in life is instrumentalized for the purpose of other men, right? I can't imagine thinking of my wife as someone other than the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, the most important person that I've chosen to spend my life with. That relationship is being instrumentalized to other men, but it also demonstrates what a complete dead end it is, because anyone with that attitude is going to struggle to an absolutely epic degree to attract and keep around women of any kind, right? Whether it's family members, whether it's a romantic partner, whether it's colleagues, whether it's anyone in a social situation. If you're broadcasting that loudly, you are going to get shown the door very quickly in a lot of spaces. And it is a complete dead end as a way to spend more time around women or have more access to women. So there's two ironies here.
They'll spend all their time crying about how they can't get laid.
Ding ding ding.
Yeah, one of the wildest things about kind of this whole sort of cultural space is what losers all these guys are. Like that is it's this whole, it's not even an ideology really, it's just kind of this cultural movement that's basically based about misery. Like these guys are not happy, they don't project happiness, you don't see any kind of joy in their lives. Everything is just absolutely grim, and the only thing that they seem to really take any sort of delight or interest in is just mocking other people, and cruelty. And that's the only thing of interest outside of, reactionary white nationalist politics.
So we titled the podcast "Normal Men" kind of as a joke because there's no such thing as a normal man, right? You can't go down to the store and get one standard man. You can't get one normal person. But at the same time, I think we all have a sense of what abnormality looks like. The difference between um, deviation, weirdness as a positive thing, and kind of abnormality as a dangerous thing. And it's really something that you're seeing pushed by these manosphere types, that this kind of really zero sum thinking that all of my relationships are instrumentalized just in what they mean to me as display pieces, is coming to the fore. I've got two sons, so I worry about this a lot. They're getting on up, knocking on the door of teenagerhood, and I think that anybody who's raising or interacting with boys at this point who says they don't worry about it is lying to you, because it's clear that there's a pipeline here that a certain number of particularly men are falling into, that leads them to some pretty dark places pretty quickly.
And I do think it's worth keeping in mind that it is very easy to fall into the trope of the kids are the issue these days. The kids are doing something wrong. Gen Z are all a bunch of fascists. All young men are Andrew Tate worshippers, this sort of general thing. And I think we have to be careful intellectually in not falling into that trap ourselves as elder millennials to younger Gen X types in here, mostly the latter. We can't just say this is an anti-Gen Z podcast, because it's not, because the kids are almost always all right and will almost definitely be fine.
The kids will be fine. The real problem is Gen X, which, contrary to what George keeps insisting, Proctor and Hell Machine and I are not members of.
Yeah, tell that to the board shorts, buddy. So yeah, I think we need to be careful to not fall into this world where the object we are criticizing or focused on is young men exclusively as some sort of phenomena that needs to be addressed. And that's especially true when it comes to how we think about this project that the four of us are engaged in. We need to do some positive definitions as well. And it can't just be a reaction against a perceived situation elsewhere in society. I think, to give my quick definition of what a normal man is someone that when you come across them, you don't immediately have a bad taste in your mouth. And that can take a wide range of forms. It's everything from just being polite to people that you come across that you haven't met before in day-to-day life, to having a worldview that accepts difference and embraces it. And there's a lot more to it too, but I think if you're the type of man, and most men are this type of man, contrary to some popular belief, if you can have a quick conversation with a coworker, stranger, family member, someone who also picks up kids at your kid's school, whatever, and not immediately turn them into what is wrong with that guy, you are a normal man. And we embrace you, brother.
One of the recent texts on this comes from Blue Sky's own Dr. Samantha Hancox Lee about the new gender synthesis, which I think we're talking a little bit around in terms of what we talk about when we talk about normal men. And Dr. Hancox Lee's, I think, a fair summation of their thesis here is that we are all gender performing at this point, which is fine and reasonable. People love gender. People love performing gender, but that both on the cis male side and on the cis female side, there's this kind of exaggerated drag in performing gender that can be really toxic. That people are putting on these over gendered masks, sometimes physically in terms of surgery, in terms of hormones, whatever, to better or more completely perform their gender. And sometimes that's causing us some friction, some problems.
Well, and I think when you an example of this, and the reason that I bring this guy up is because he got name checked in that Douthat interview like 5 different times. But like Bronze Age Pervert, who is a right wing reactionary who mostly has gotten big because of other reactionaries on Twitter, like spends a lot of time on his Twitter feed posting an awful lot of interesting thirst traps, we will say, in terms of a performance of gender that I think is sort of unusual. It's always, cut abs, basically hairless bodies, attracted to a certain type of person, and not necessarily women most of the time.
As someone that's currently spent the last 24 hours staring at marbled, chiseled abs, literally chiseled abs out of marble, from a society that had some weird stuff going on with respect to gender. Are you saying that there might be some weird stuff going on with respect to gender from Mr. Bronze Age Pervert over there?
I think there might be. I think it's an interesting approach to sort of performing your gender.
George, are you saying that the return guys are not so far off as we sometimes think they are when it comes to the Greeks and the Romans?
More Greeks than Romans in the respect I think you're going for there. But yes, I think that is what I was going after. I mean, it's really interesting walking through a museum of classical statues and seeing and being conscious of the specific ways gender is idealized and represented. And it is really idealized and represented in specific ways. The men have the exact same torso, the exact same proportion of bicep to pectoral, the exact same level of muscle, but not chiseledness in their abs. The women have the same body proportions. Their bust to hip ratio is the same. The Greeks in the classical period got it down to a science in terms of idealizing gender, and it does not surprise me at all that they were also quite famous for experimenting with gender in a lot of different ways. Some of them non-consensual, which we don't have to dwell too hard on. But the fact that Mr. Pervert would identify with that dynamic is not at all surprising to me.
We just need to remind him that the Greeks for all their chiseled looks, they did, after all, get rinsed by the Iranians.
If anybody called me Mr. Pervert, I would throw myself in front of a bus.
And to be clear here, we're very much in favor of gender expression here on the Normal Men podcast. Get down with your bad self, let 1,000 flowers bloom. But
Hell, some of us even do it ourselves from time to time. What with my squats and my flat brim hats and my Nike Air Maxes and my pickup truck. I mean, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with any of that. At least I don't think. Wait, is there something wrong with any of that?
Yeah, for folks who have never seen him before, George looks like he got vomited out of a Blink 182 video.
anyway, that's our big picture take on masculinity for the week. But we also had some pretty interesting news happening in especially the national security space this week, with Telemessage, which shut down all service apparently about 45 minutes before we started taping this. We talked some about signal messaging, right? You guys are all familiar with how our national security principals added a journalist to their signal message chat about bombings in Yemen. We once again have instant messaging in the news. This time with Signal once again. We talked to you about how Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz added a journalist to a national security chat. Well, it turns out that they haven't been using Signal per se. They've been using Telemessage, which is a Signal clone. Telemessage has the major difference from Signal that while Signal is end-to-end encrypted, which is to say the only places that you can see the messages that you're sending back and forth are either at originator or or at recipient, Telemessage archives these messages somewhere else. Now, that's not facially illegitimate. There's lots of legitimate reasons you might want to do that. Maybe you're a government agency that has some kind of legal requirement to keep archives. Maybe you're a company that has some kind of legal requirement to keep communications archived for discovery. This is something that the SEC has been in a lot of people's face about over the last several years. But what it does mean is that in addition to your messages being subject to compromise either by sender or by recipient, there's an archive sitting out there of your messages that potentially someone else could access. And in fact, that is exactly what has happened. Telemessage downstream from an image of Mike Waltz using Telemessage in a cabinet meeting got hacked at least twice, probably a lot more than that in the last week, and various caches of messages used by either the United States government or by companies that are contracting for the United States government have been exposed by hackers. So far, the breaches that we know about are a set of CBP communications, which includes lots of information about CBP agent identities. We've got a set of lobbying communications about trying to get some crypto stuff passed through the Senate. And in the wake of those hacks, Telemessage has now completely shut down their operation as of about 45 minutes before we started recording this podcast. So they're very much aware that they have a vulnerability here and that this is a problem.
There's kind of an irony to the fact that they're using Signal to avoid regular normal channels of communication, but that they're not actually using Signal. They're using a Signal clone, which archives normal, the traditional methods of communication.
Yeah, I'm confused here. Isn't the whole idea of using Signal for these people to avoid disclosures and record keeping? Like, isn't that the entire point of using it in the first place? Which I realize would be highly illegal for a bunch of different reasons related to mandatory record keeping, but they don't care about this sort of stuff. So why are they using Telemessage instead of, for instance, email?
So I think what's happening here is that Signal is a convenient way to communicate. We run our chat on Signal because it's handy. And once you have people that are already on the Signal app who are using Signal for purposes of evading reporting, it still becomes useful for other people who don't necessarily want to have no record of everything to talk to those people through that same mechanism. So that's where telemessage is coming in. It's allowing people who are essentially obeying these kinds of record requirements to talk to people who might be outside of that within Signal. Now, to be clear, Telemessage has had government contracts for a while. This isn't a new Trump innovation. That government agencies have been using Telemessage. The company as a whole is about 20 years old. I don't know how far back their Signal work goes, but this is something where if you wanted to run Signal through an official channel in a U.S. government agency, my sense is that you'd probably wind up running Telemessage to cooperate with things like FOIA requirements or with other message archiving requirements. So it's possible that the people who are trying to do this right are the people who are using Telemessage rather than Signal. In the NatSec space, and this is going to be speculation rather than things I'm confident about. But one of the issues here is that Telemessage is an Israeli company. They were started in Tel Aviv. They're founded by people who used to work for Israeli intelligence. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. The Israeli spies are some of the best signals intelligence operators in the game. So there's a reason that you wind up running a lot of ex-Israeli spies for these kinds of infotech companies. But we have a long history between the United States and Israel of Israel spying on our spy apparatus and on our national security apparatus, like constantly.
What? Wait, I thought they were our ally. Why would they do that?
So to some extent, I think this is a little bit of a culture clash thing that Israel has felt for a long time that as, kind of an occasionally difficult to handle client state of the United States, it's in their best interest for them to be really sure that they know what we're thinking. So from the Israeli perspective, this is maybe just good manners to spy on the United States so that they can be sure that they're not being, snowed by our diplomacy and that they're reacting for good or for ill to things that we actually want. But this has been the source of a lot of tension in the past. We've had spies imprisoned for many, many years for passing information to Israel. We've had many breaches from Israel into fairly secure things in the United States. It's the best spin you can put on it is that this is an extremely annoying thing your friend does at the table when you're eating dinner. It's extremely bad manners, but they keep doing it.
I do think it's worth just to be super clear, because I was a little bit confused at first. The Telemessage was an Israeli company. They are now owned by Smarsh, who are a software company that is based about a mile from my apartment. But Telemessage definitely did originate as an Israeli company.
I believe that roll-up's about 2 years old that Smarsh acquired Telemessage.
Sorry, hold on. Smarsh? Are we serious with this name? Smarsh? That sounds like something a daughter would call her dad or something. Smarsh?
No, that's a perfectly respectable bog German name.
So Smarsh actually comes from the corporate reporting side of things, where they're trying to do messaging compliance for mostly financial firms, and then Telemessage represents them branching out into more the government space.
And there were some pretty high-profile SEC settlements, as Proctor alluded to earlier, over the past few years, where financial firms were doing a lot of business over WhatsApp. Not necessarily Signal, I don't think. WhatsApp was the big one, where financial advisors or people in client-facing roles would be communicating with clients and with each other and with other people in the firm over WhatsApp, and these messages weren't archived for retrieval later, and that's a compliance issue for certain kinds of financial firms. So there is a real, again, outside of government, leaving the Trump administration or the federal government completely out of the picture, there is a very real business case to use end-to-end secure communications that are then archived somewhere for retrieval at a later date, with the big caveat that these end-to-end encrypted communications must actually be secure, which is where we appear to have run into an issue with Telemessage.
Yeah, and to kind of expand on that, the SEC has been just smacking companies down on this over the last few years. I think they're up to over 100 companies that they've done some kind of enforcement action against about these off-channel communications. And some of these settlements are, these are 9-figure settlements. Like this is a lot of money in play for this stuff. So you kind of get why certain organizations might want to come up with a better solution to that than getting whacked for $100 million fine by the SEC. That said, at this point, it's fully breached. It's a disaster. We've already seen information come out of this that the United States government has represented in court that it does not have and could not get, such as these CBP messages include passenger manifests for these flights to El Salvador that the government has represented in court that it can't produce, that are now, reasonably out there in the open. So I think this is going to be a developing and continuing story over the next couple of weeks as we sift through. Possibly related to this, one of the primary contractors for CBP deportation flights, Global X, got its website hacked today by a hacker who communicated with 404 Media, which was the same outfit that broke the first hacking story about the telemessage stuff the day before. So I think there's some chance that there might have been maybe credentials or maybe something else in that first hacked dump that is going to result in more messages coming out, more information coming out.
Now they've got those, so they've got flight manifests for these deportation flights, despite telling judges that they cannot produce them. Judges love that, right?
Can confirm, judges love that.
Judge Zenas, who is the judge up in Maryland, who is currently going through discovery on things related to the Abrego Garcia case, is doing an expedited discovery process right now, this week. This is happening all at the same time, and this stuff is going to have implications for that discovery.
So, speaking of the FEC and speaking of corporate filings and business filings and retaining records, George is going to tell us a little bit about quarterly filings.
Ooh, earnings season. We love an earnings season, don't we, gentlemen? So once a quarter, if you are a public company, you're required to report certain information about your business so that everyone can tell what exactly is going on and nothing sneaks up on them to surprise them in any way. This inevitably leads to people forecasting what will be released in earnings and then being surprised by the release. So the SEC has managed to put us into a position where we have some information and we guess on that, as opposed to no information and guessing on that. People always be guessing and trying to make money in the process. What I am describing to you is the great dance known as earnings season. It happens once every 13 weeks. It runs for about 8 weeks. So it's going on roughly half the year, which is fun for me as someone that has a lot to do during earnings season every quarter. Most companies, not all, but most, have their quarters end on the 31st of March, the 30th of June, the 30th of September, and the 31st of December. So you get a nice snapshot of what was going on in that business, and it's usually released anywhere from a week to a month after the end of the quarter. So we've had most of the big companies report earnings thus far. We're recording this Monday evening U.S. time on May 5th. So we still have some big names to come out, but in terms of market cap, most of the market is reported at this point. The stock market actually rose 9 days in a row ending Friday of last week. And there was a lot of consternation over this, given the fact that trade is not looking any better really than it did a couple weeks ago, and maybe looking a fair bit worse. One reason that the market did so well for that short period of time is earnings. And we haven't had in aggregate blowout quarter, like really strong numbers, but we've had a lot of companies report good numbers headed into the disruptions of trade. And a lot of what companies have said about the disruptions of trade has been the sort of thing that you would expect if it's a manageable problem. Now, whether that will end up being the case is another question entirely. But based on the new information we've gotten over the past couple of weeks from some of the largest companies in the world and some companies that are impacted by trade pretty significantly, things are looking okay. So I'm not saying this to say you need to go buy the stock market right now and everything's fine and all good. But we got some new information. It's been positive. Market's been up. Whether that will continue in the long run is an open question. And important to note, we have not gotten reports from retailers yet. So the most impacted parts of the stock market from this sort of slowdown in goods into the US economy are not yet on the radar. And they may not give us a good, clear picture of what's going to happen to them next, even when they do report. So stay tuned. But thus far, corporate earnings reports have been pretty good for Q1, and that's where we're at with that.
Have we gotten earnings from Apple yet?
We did get earnings from Apple, so they had a pretty substantial, well, not the end of the world, but a substantial miss in China. They beat in the U.S. and they guided. Their guidance basically was that they have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen in Q2, but after that, they can't really predict what's going to happen next. So, if you're what we call a bear and think the market's going to drop, you take that and you say, well, that's really bad because who knows what's going to be happening from the end of June on. And if you're a bull, you say, look, their business is doing well, and maybe tariffs will hit them, maybe they won't, but I think they won't, so we're good.
Yeah, I was thinking of them just as obviously huge consumer electronics company. A fair amount of dependency on manufacturing in China, and so I was imagining that if the tariffs are going to hit really hard, that's going to be a company where you're probably going to see it.
It will. I will say Apple's earnings call mentioned India, I think 7 times. They are really hyping up India as their source for electronic goods. Now, the full reciprocal tariff treatment, if we go down that road, then they run into a lot of other problems with some other Southeast Asian suppliers. But for iPhones, they're hoping that by focusing on India, that they're going to avoid the worst of the China tariff shock and be able to reroute those Chinese-produced iPhones elsewhere in the world.
And just to jump in, there's been at least heavy rumors that India is the first large country that there's going to be one of these long rumored trade deals with. So it may be that speculation about that is something that Apple is more closely attuned to than the rest of us.
Those rumors, to be clear, are not coming from the tall gentleman in the corner in a trench coat that is just Howard Lutnick standing on Treasury Secretary Bassad's shoulders. They're not coming from there. They're very serious rumors.
I was going to ask whether these were actual serious rumors or whether these were like Besant's Canadian girlfriend rumors.
As far as I can tell, in the context of what we would normally define as global trade agreements between two countries, a new free trade agreement, any rumors of progress or nearing a deal are complete nonsense. Now, maybe what they're going to roll out is some sort of very limited, very narrow, quote unquote, deal that is a way to generate positive press. But in terms of real big changes to the specific rules that govern trade between two countries, there's not any evidence that they're making significant progress. And we just had a headline earlier this afternoon saying Japan has been told they're not going to get exempted from reciprocal tariffs no matter what. So that's the end of that potential deal. As for India, who knows?
Well, not until they give up the bowling ball test, which is definitely a real thing and not just Trump misremembering the David Letterman bit from back in the 90s.
To be clear, the bowling ball test is a method of testing automobiles where you drop a bowling ball on them. It's never been really clear to me what it's supposed to demonstrate, but it was a memorable visual for many years.
And that's why it's being trotted out. All right. Well, I think that's it for us this week. As your faithful correspondent, currently sitting within literal eye shot of the Parthenon in Athens, Greece. I had a really good time tonight, gentlemen, and thanks for joining in, everybody that's listening. I really hope you get the chance to listen to this episode and then rate and review it, because that's how people find us in podcast apps. And every podcast I listen to says this, so it must be important. So yeah, rate us, review us, tell your friends, tell anybody, really. Just be normal about it. I'm George.
I'm Proctor.
I'm low tech speedrun enjoyer.
And I'm Go Like Hell Machine.
And this has been Normal Men.